申し上げました通り、こちら、英語でのセッションとなりますところですね、ご了承いただければと思います。また、英語のセッションに関してですね、何かご要望とあれば、ぜひツイートでいろいろですね、ご意見もお寄せいただければですね、ひょっとしたらまた次回開催の時にですね、何か改善されるかもしれないので、活発なご意見の方をお寄せいただければと思います。では大丈夫ですかね。はい、それではセッションの方を開始したいと思います。クリス様、よろしくお願いいたします。
Hello, hello. Hope everyone is doing okay here, and I apologize for not being able to speak Japanese at a Japanese event, but I'm happy to be here today to talk a little bit about CNCF and kind of what CNCF provides for our project. So in the room, how many people have heard of Kubernetes? Right, almost probably everyone. Now, how many people have heard of CNCF? Okay, that's better than I expected. More people know our projects than necessarily the foundation behind them, and that's actually by design. So I'll give a brief introduction of myself. So I have the fun job of being the CTO of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and I help also run a sister foundation to the CNCF called the Open Container Initiative, which is trying to standardize essentially different aspects of the container stack. So in a previous life, I worked on a variety of different things. I worked on Fedora, Gentoo, spent some time at Red Hat, co-founded a company around Eclipse and open source a long time ago. For some of you that use Eclipse, you could either thank me or I apologize. You know, and I spent many years at Twitter working on kind of containerized open source infrastructure. But today I'm running CNCF and OCI. It's been an interesting, you know, kind of 2.5 years for me since starting CNCF OCI. 2 years ago, I'm positive the majority of this room probably did not use Kubernetes. I would be very surprised if someone in this room was actually using Kubernetes. If you are, congratulations. But you could see over time that, you know, if we look back 2.5 years ago, there's kind of two trends going on. One, there was something affectionately known as the container wars, which was kind of funny. But you know, this tweet basically describes the situation at the time. And then also, you know, this kind of trends graph that Google kind of shows 2 years ago, Kubernetes definitely was not as interesting as some other technology out there, but things have changed. So now, obviously, people are less talking about you know, the container wars. Containers are now boring in many ways, and then Kubernetes has kind of become the de facto way to orchestrate and run containers these days. So it's been a fun 2.5 years, even though things are getting a little bit more boring than they were a long time ago. So what is CNCF? Like I mentioned before, more people know about our projects than necessarily the foundation behind them. So we were a non-for-profit foundation that was founded about 2.5 years ago in late December 2015 to essentially bring cloud native technology and projects to kind of to the world. And so Google, IBM, Red Hat, and some other companies helped seed the foundation, you know, with funds and technology. So Kubernetes was our first project in CNCF, but we have definitely grown to more projects. As I will tell you, cloud native is more than just orchestration when it comes to containers. So the other important thing to note is if you go to the CNCF website, you can never download a like CNCF distro or anything, right? We are a collection of independently run projects that essentially enhance and add to cloud native. As a foundation, I'll show you, like we have a lot of members now. We have 200 plus members, but you know, really the important thing that I want to kind of get across is of our membership, we are the first open source foundation that I know of that actually has the 6 major kind of cloud providers in the world part of the foundation and contributing to the work. So this has never really been done before in the industry, and I think it kind of shows the value of what cloud native actually means. Cloud native is all about allowing kind of portability across public, private clouds, and having kind of the big players all involved here, I think is an important, strong signal of the value that we provide as a foundation. Like I mentioned, we have lots of members. I would love to see more Japanese members here, but thank you for everyone that actually participates. It's like, I see Yahoo Japan somewhere in there. Hey, Yahoo Japan, and Creation Online and some other folks. But I would love to see more. But we could talk about that later. Other services that CNCF provides is a big aspect of cloud native is to ensure that our projects and technology run on multiple clouds. So if you go to CNCF.ci, you'll see some of our projects. We've essentially built stuff that will run Kubernetes and our projects and run their tests and do verification to ensure they all work properly across all the major clouds out there like AWS, Azure, GCE, and so on. Most importantly, we also launched recently a conformance and certification program. So one of the big promises of Kubernetes is, well, if Kubernetes is supported by all the major cloud providers and different private clouds out there, you could have some guarantee and portability that your Kubernetes services could run on different clouds. So we launched this a huge conformance and certification effort to basically make this happen, and I'm proud to say that as of today, we have something like 54 certified Kubernetes distros. This includes the big cloud providers, but also a lot of other products that are built on top of Kubernetes, things like OpenShift, Docker Enterprise, and so on. So now that you kind of have a little bit idea of kind of what CNCF is, kind of what it provides, I'd like to talk a little bit about what cloud native is and kind of how things have changed since we started the organization. So I'm sure some of you have seen this, but this essentially kind of shows the evolution of kind of where we came from to kind of where we are today. So cloud native computing in essence can be defined as a very simple thing. It's essentially of packaging services that live in containers that are orchestrated by some central process like Kubernetes. That's it. So those are three aspects of what we consider cloud native computing as defined by the foundation. How did we get here? So it's kind of interesting to, I'm sure many of you have kind of grew up in the days where you would go procure Spark boxes from Sun and then run applications there. Eventually, the fact that you would buy hardware from a vendor and run your applications on there changed. VMware came around, popularized virtualization. Beautiful. We could have VMs, package more of them on one machine, get a little bit more optimal resource utilization out of that, maybe even run different OSs and so on. But VMware really popularized the notion of virtualization. Eventually, AWS in 2006, who would have known? Infrastructure as a service became a very popular thing, and eventually 2009, Heroku popularized the platform as a service play. Then the open source versions of these things happened. So in 2010 and 2011, OpenStack did the IaaS version, and then Cloud Foundry did the open source PaaS version. It wasn't until 2013 that containers were essentially popularized by Docker. And I think what Docker really nailed was if you make it easy to not only package your application in a container, but share it through like Docker Hub and make it easy for people to kind of distribute and fetch what you've built, kind of helps kind of the distribution and popularity of things. Kind of has almost a viral effect to it too. So Docker came around, popularized containers, and then in 2015 we founded CNCF to kind of bring this notion of running containers at scale. We call it cloud native, but that's kind of where we are. In 2018, we've seen that Kubernetes is basically the default orchestrator, and we have a bunch of projects around that make it a little bit easier to use Kubernetes, and I'll get into that into a bit. The cool and important thing to really notice here is we changed our building blocks of applications. We went from essentially like a big single kind of little monolithic application that may live in a virtual machine to eventually smaller services packaged in containers. The also cool thing here from a person being an open source person for many years, we moved from a closed single vendor ecosystem to a open source multiple vendor collaboration ecosystem. So it's kind of been interesting to see this trend over time. So there's from virtualization to cloud native. So how do companies and organizations actually go and become cloud native? Well, this has been an interesting an interesting question for us to answer, as every company tends to be different. Some startups tend not to have any legacy, so they kind of are able to build from scratch and use newer technology. Older companies that may be running things on old mainframes, or maybe they're still running Spark boxes, who knows, right? That there's different levels of companies out there in terms of how they could kind of break apart their applications and the services and run them in containers in a system like Kubernetes. So a couple things that we try to do. One, we try to tackle the problem of, if you ever look out there, there's a lot of different technologies out there that help you either work with containers, work with orchestrators and so on. So we created something called the cloud native landscape. So I don't know if so many of you have saw this, but it essentially goes and shows the different CNCF projects out there, what categories they live in, and obviously makes recommendations. So yes, we think that the projects in CNCF are very good options for you, but we do realize that there are other potentially commercial offerings or other things that could be useful too. But the whole point of this exercise is to show you that there are different options and helps you kind of build a mental map of this, because this space is a little complicated. What's really cool is recently we decided that we got sick of managing this kind of graphic, and we decided to open source the whole process. So now if you go to your web browser and you go to l.cncf.io, you could actually now filter and see an interactive version of this landscape. So, for example, if I wanted to go to, let me go see if this could work. So yeah, if I go to l.cncf.io, I get this nice little landscape where I could browse through our projects and members. I could filter by, let's say I love container registries. So, I could have an idea of what open source container registries are there, which ones are from different companies, and have an idea. I could also, let's see what I could do. Since we're in Japan, let's see if I could find, I've never done this before, Tokyo. Yeah, so these are, some of our, Japanese members. I've never heard of Sheepdog or LeoFS, but I'm sure they do something, something useful. But the key thing is that this is now open source and available to the community to help contribute to and help us actually track the different technologies and projects that operate on this space. So if you go to github.com/cncf/landscape, you could go contribute ideas, projects, and so on there. The other important thing that we did, so this was solving the let's categorize all the different crazy projects, companies, and products down there in cloud native. The other aspect is, how do we actually guide companies that, maybe a startup, maybe they're a long established company, how do we get them to become cloud native? So the first thing that we realized is there are many paths. Like some companies, they start with containerization. Sometimes other companies already have maybe like a service mesh deployed or taking advantage of modern CICD techniques. So we created this kind of concept of, let's build a trail map. It's kind of like a game in some ways. Like it kind of shows you a path of how to become cloud native. It's not, it's not the only way, but it kind of shows you what we think is a decent way to kind of become cloud native. Different kind of approaches and arguments of where to start, but since we are at Container Days and containerization is important to all of us, we generally recommend that companies start with containerization. It could be as simple as taking your VM and stuffing it in one gigantic container and starting there, or breaking it apart into kind of services and putting in containers. But generally, almost any company out there will start with containerization. Many other companies have done crazy things. My favorite example is a company called, in the US, we have a company called Ticketmaster. They have very old systems still running on like PDP-11s handling processing. So to containerize it, they actually wrote an emulator and stuffed that, PDP-11 emulator, stuffed that in a container, and now runs their old, binary in a container. So cloud native. So it works. So that's one approach. Step two for cloud native is essentially, in order to, part of the premise of cloud native is to be able to deliver your applications faster, to deploy faster. In order to do that, you need to have a very solid CI/CD, pipeline built. So generally for step two, we say that companies should set up a solid CI/CD infrastructure. There are many solutions for this out there. I'm sure many of you use Jenkins, Spinnaker, GitLab CI. There's lots of different approaches to this thing. We have no projects yet in CNCF that tackle this problem, but we understand that it's an important step for people to become cloud native. So yeah, that's CI/CD for you. What's interesting is we had some arguments of whether you should start with CI/CD first or containerization first, because a lot of companies sometimes do have a CI/CD set up before they even have containers. But we decided containerization is the most important step moving forward. You have containers, you have CI/CD. Now you need to orchestrate them somehow. Well, obviously in CNCF, Kubernetes is a very good solution at running containers and orchestrating them. We understand that there are other solutions out there to run containers. At Twitter, I spent many years working on Mesos. There's Nomad. Netflix just open source Titus. Like there's different approaches out there, but the key thing is you have some kind of orchestration system to manage your containers. So that's step three. And next step. So you have all these crazy services living in containers being orchestrated. You essentially need a way to observe them and monitor what they produced, whether it's log output, performance, and so on. So in CNCF, we have a variety of projects that help you get there. So I'm sure some of you have played with Prometheus. Prometheus was kind of inspired by an internal Google tool that Google used to monitor their kind of internal version of Kubernetes at that time, Borg. So Prometheus is a very kind of high quality project that helps you basically monitor, your Kubernetes services, but not, but it can monitor many other things. Prometheus is used to monitor pretty much anything, but if you're using Kubernetes, it integrates beautifully in there. For logging, Fluent obviously is I'm pretty sure a popular project in Japan, since Treasure Data is involved, and they're out of Japan, but Fluent is kind of a mature project and was one of the earlier projects that joined CNCF. It's a great solution to kind of handle I need to essentially aggregate my logs and transform them and dump them somewhere. So it's a very widely used project with a very large ecosystem. Tracing, open tracing is a kind of set of APIs that allow you to instrument your application. So it's used by a lot of companies out there, and it's an evolving API to handle tracing. And then Jaeger is a system that takes advantage of open tracing APIs to build you kind of a full-blown experience in terms of being able to instrument and trace your applications. Jaeger came out of a company called Uber, and essentially is a good solution if you're looking to do a kind of full-blown distributed tracing system. So it's a fun project. I like the logo, but it's used by quite a few companies out there. All right, so that was essentially the observability. Step 4, we are now able to observe our wonderful cloud-native application. Step 5 is, so we have all these services living in containers. We kind of need a way to kind of connect them, deal with service discovery, and so on. So there's this concept of a service mesh, and in CNCF we have a couple different approaches to handling this. So first, Envoy, kind of helps you kind of in the data plane aspects of a service mesh. If you're familiar with the service mesh, there's essentially the data plane portion, which kind of handles the bits, and then there's the control plane portion, which handles all sorts of things around policy, authorization, and so on related to your services. But Envoy is a very good solution for the data plane bit. It's embedded in projects like Istio and a bunch of other kind of cloud providers are actually now using Envoy as the basis of their next generation load balancing, or LB, products. So it originally came from Lyft, which is great to see. So it's nice technology after we had Jaeger from Uber. Yeah, great project used by a lot of people. So LinkerD kind of both has a control plane and data plane. It's one of our earlier projects, actually based off a lot of work that happened at my days at Twitter, and has a lot of the older kind of ex-Twitter engineers working on that project. So great project, been around in CNCF for a while, and for people that are built, that have JVM-based applications, I think LinkerD is a great opportunity for you to look at. And then service discovery and kind of DNS related discovery has been kind of, I would say, not ideal in Kubernetes for a while. Recently, CoreDNS was integrated into kind of, I think, alpha or beta state for the latest version of Kubernetes. So another good project from CNCF. So step 6. So got the service mesh, our services are kind of connected. We've got to deal with networking. So there are many approaches to this, but the really big thing that we provide in CNCF for networking is a standard around how you actually attach devices to your services. So very simple. CNI is a spec. There's a variety of plugins out there that are CNI compatible, but the essence is that there is one standard way to attach networking interfaces. Now that networking is all set up, eventually you're going to have to store your data somewhere. You could either use a cloud service to deal with that, or potentially a distributed database. One good option here is we recently accepted a project from YouTube/Google around, essentially it's a sharded version of kind of how they run MySQL internally at YouTube. So Vitesse is a solid project that, in terms of production readiness, like if it works for YouTube, it probably works for you, is generally my opinion. But a lot of companies have started using it as a good solid solution to scale out MySQL in a cloud native way. And the Vitesse team has been working on better Kubernetes integration and so on. So to me, it's a solid offering as a distributed database, but there's others out there. Messaging. So, if you're looking for a way to help, your services to kind of communicate with each other, whether it's through like a binary protocol or through like a pub subsystem, CNCF has 2 great projects to help you there. One, NATS, which was recently accepted. It's a project that has been kind of around for quite a while. It's been used by a lot of organizations out there, and kind of in a similar space of like Apache Kafka and other type of systems, but a great kind of messaging pub subsystem that's written in Go, very easily embeddable, like many of the other projects in CNCF. GRPC, of course, people are familiar with. There's a lot of GRPC usage in the Kubernetes code base, but a very good technology if you're looking for kind of high performance way to build services. So good kind of solid technology. So Step 9. We waited for kind of container runtime. So some of you may be familiar, but there are multiple container runtimes out there. It's not just it's just not Docker, right? So there's containerd, there's Rocket, there's Creo, there's the crazy Kata containers people. So there's a multitude of solutions out there, and so. You know, generally, depending on your use cases, you want to choose which container runtime works for you. So I don't want to kind of dive in to all these, but containerd is essentially born from the core Docker engine codebase. It's great project, you know, growing community, and is one option for you to consider. Rocket is another one that was built by our friends at CoreOS, which is now part of Red Hat. And so different runtime, but definitely you know, swappable from a Kubernetes perspective. And there's Creo out there, which is part of the Kubernetes incubator, and so on as an option. Finally, step 10, the last step. Eventually, you know, you're going to have to figure out how to deploy and, you know, deal with like how you fetch containers, secure them, and so on. So we consider software distribution as kind of the last step of becoming cloud native. And so, you know, we don't technically have a container registry in CNCF, but we do have projects that are used by container registries for securing things and so on. So we have one project called Tough/Notary. It's a little bit weird where the update framework, or Tough, is a specification that's kind of used widely in terms of how you actually secure do secure software distribution. And then Notary is kind of a service that takes advantage of the Tough specifications to apply that specifically for container signing and distribution. So the project came from Docker and is kind of one approach out there to handle secure container distribution. So, you know, this was our attempt of how to give people a map to become cloud native while highlighting CNCF projects. The key thing to understand is it's not perfect. This is kind of based on what we've kind of experienced talking to many companies out there. We would love your feedback. You know, if you have ideas on how to improve this, or if you have like, hey, maybe you should add another step, or you should redo this one. The project's open source. You could go to github.com/cncf/landscape, file issues, and we would kind of love to hear from you, because there's different ways to do this, and the more feedback we get, the better map that we could have. So what's next for CNCF? So now that you kind of have a better understanding of what the foundation is, what projects we have, and kind of what we support, what's going on next for us? So I'm sure some of you have heard serverless. You know, yay, everyone, you know, all the cloud providers want you to convert to serverless and forget containers, right? Who needs them? That's a whole other funny story we could talk about, but, you know, serverless to me is just one kind of different programming model in the cloud native space. So it's applicable to a certain type of application. In CNCF, we have a serverless working group that has been spinning up and looking at the different serverless frameworks and projects out there. Which ones are Kubernetes native that work well with Kubernetes, which ones are not, what tools are out there to handle, if you ever played with some of the serverless frameworks out there or have deployed a serverless application of a decent size, you know that monitoring is a nightmare. So there's different approaches out here, and so we started to catalog them just like we did with the cloud native landscape. So as I mentioned, we founded this working group. So a lot of the different, you know, since we have the kind of top 6 cloud providers in the world with a lot of different kind of serverless startups and other companies, we're actually able to work together to kind of come up with interesting technology to essentially make serverless embody some of the cloud native principles that I talked about before. So one thing that we're doing is first of all, we produced a white paper, for lack of a better word. Essentially, it was a document that highlighted what serverless is kind of agreed upon by all the members in CNCF, common definitions and terminology that could be used, because depending on who you talk to, everyone has a different view of what serverless is. So we accomplished that. The other thing that we're doing is, the fact that we have, AWS, Azure, Google, and IBM and other folks in the room is a big issue with serverless is there is issues with portability when it comes to functions that you write, and all sorts of aspects of portability. One, you just have you're depending on proprietary events from cloud providers, but also a lot of the tooling is not portable across providers. So we're starting with a very simple project to get all the kind of buy-in from cloud providers around essentially event format. So it's a common event model for serverless. It is aimed to be supported by all the major cloud providers and will be proposed as an official CNCF project down the road to be voted upon by our technical board. But if you if you search GitHub Cloud Events, you could find the project. But to me, it's an interesting thing to see all these cloud providers collaborating and trying to make serverless more portable and have cloud native principles attached to it. What else is going on? We have an early stage home now for projects in CNCF. So there's been certain efforts that we've been focusing on around, if you've used Kubernetes, storage is kind of not a fully solved problem in many ways. So recently we accepted a project called Rook, which is an interesting approach on how to kind of handle a specific type of storage on Kubernetes using the operator pattern to help manage Ceph, essentially. But Rook wants to expand its management of storage to other systems out there, but essentially integrating it natively into Kubernetes. Security is a hot topic. We've recently accepted 2 projects into CNCF. One is Spiffy, which is kind of based off of some internal Google tooling called LOAS. Essentially, it's a way to do mutual TLS and provide identity to your services so they could talk to each other securely through certificates. Fantastic. It's a great idea, and the Spiffy team is working with the SIG-Auth and Kubernetes community to integrate this into Kubernetes. Policy. For those of you who have used newer versions of Kubernetes, there's a system called RBAC, or Role-Based Access Control. While RBAC is great, there are certain limitations to RBAC. So there's a SIG kind of policy group within Kubernetes and a new project called Open Policy Agent, which is essentially providing a flexible language and runtime to allow you to do custom policy onto Kubernetes. So these are all early stages, but these are projects that are looking to influence Kubernetes in a way to support better security and storage. So that's kind of a theme for us this year in CNCF in 2018. Getting involved and getting help. Okay, so if you're a company or individual that is learning Kubernetes or any of our projects, there's many ways to get involved with the foundation and get help. So first of all, we have free Kubernetes training material through edX. It is not in Japanese, but we're working on it. So I promise you that later this year we will have more material in Japanese. We also have 2 types of exams. So for people who are familiar with CCNA through or Red Hat RHCE, we have a similar exam for Kubernetes. Right now there's 1, but there'll be 2 exams soon. One is the CKA, the Certified Kubernetes Administrator, and this is focused on your what we call operators, sysadmins, or site reliability engineers, so the people that actually have to administer the Kubernetes cluster. And there's a new exam coming up called CKAD, so Certified Kubernetes Application Developer. So this is the person that is just writing applications on top of Kubernetes, and so they don't really care how it's managed. That's someone else's problem. So these are 2 courses that we'll have. They will be offered in Japanese and so on, so look forward to that announcement. But the important thing here to note is there is the curriculum for this exam is all online and open source, so you could take a look at it. And there's been a lot of great blog posts and content out there on taking the exam. And of course, you'd hopefully find a local company to help you out. I just talked about that. So we have a, if you're an individual or company and you're looking for help to get started with Kubernetes, we have a notion, a program called Kubernetes or Kubernetes Certified Service Provider, KCSP. These are essentially companies that have a strong experience with Kubernetes. They're either contributors, they have a good business model, and so on. They have certified engineers themselves that are CKDs. In Japan, we have Creation Online, which is a KCSP. So if you're interested in getting some help, you could kind of work with them to get that. But there's a variety of companies out there in the world that are providing support. If you like to go to events and actually meet some of the Kubernetes team or Prometheus or any of the CNCF project maintainers, we're actually having an event in 2 weeks in Europe, in Copenhagen. Big event, there'll be 4,000 plus people there, very exciting for us. We are doing our first event in Asia this year, in China and Shanghai in November. It's going to be exciting to see how that goes. Hopefully some of you can make it, since the travel's a little bit easier than Copenhagen or North America. But North America in December is our big event. We plan to have 5,000 to 6,000 people there, and we hope to see some of you at that event. Finally, we have newsletters out there that you could sign up for on the CNCF website. We also run Cube Weekly. I don't know how many of you follow that, but CNCF helps run that now. We have a variety of case studies online. We have a meetup program. I know we have some CNCF meetups in Japan. And of course, we have Twitter, blogs, Slack, mailing list, and so on. I'll post the slides online so you can also take that later. So my biggest thing is, our CNCF's presence in Japan is still very young. We have, a few member companies participating. I would love to see if you're, for those of you who raised your hand using Kubernetes, we would love for you to either contribute case studies, join as a member. I think our community is stronger if more companies and individuals contribute and participate. So if you're interested in joining, feel free to email me, find me on Twitter, or go to the website to learn more information. So I'm more than happy to help you through that process. But other than that, basically almost out of time. I have a few minutes for questions. So I just wanted to thank everyone for listening to me for the last 30 or so minutes. The key kind of point I want to end with is there are many paths to cloud native and different technologies and approaches. The CNCF is trying to help individuals and organizations through that journey. That's all we do, and we're happy to support our projects and community to do that. So if you're interested in joining, find me. I'll be here for the next couple hours and happy hour and all that stuff. So I'd like to end it saying that I hope you learned something new today, because that's basically the goal of all my talks. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'm very responsive over email and Twitter usually. So thank you very much, and it's been a lovely event. So thank you.
CNCF クリス・アニスリック様による発表、エボリューディング・ザ・コンテナ・ランドスケープでした。以上をもちましてですね、こちら、ホール B でのセッションをすべて終了とさせていただきます。この後ですね、参加